On today's show, we're putting the fun and Fun Friday. Hop on in for a nice, chill, relaxing cruise down memory lane, specifically over the last 5 years, filling your nostalgia juices, the highlights of the last 5 years, 5 seasons, I should say, of Padres baseball.
You are Locked On Padres, your daily San Diego Padres podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Greetings, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to another edition of the Locked On Padres podcast, which is part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day for Friday, February 21st. As always, I'm your host with sometimes occasionally, but certainly not always the most, Javier Reyes. You can find me on Twitter /X and Blue Sky at Javipeno, Javiipeno. Go subscribe to the Just Baseball newsletter for up-to-date info on all things happening in baseball. Today's episode, guys, is brought to you by PrizePicks. Download the app today and use code LOCKEDONMLB to win $50 instantly when you play your first $5 lineup. PrizePicks, run your game. And speaking of running, we are running down the road of nostalgia today, guys. I want to have just a peaceful episode on today's podcast. We're just going to be talking about some of the highlights of the last 5 years, covering the show because it's been 5 years, and it's kind of funny that I'm using this as the landmark because 2020 was my first season, and 2020 was quite the year. It's so long ago in the not super long ago, but it's in context of all things, it's been a while since that year, right? And it's just so much has changed, and I'm always like, it's just so weird that I started covering this team, started really getting fully into this team, fully ingrained in the Padres culture in a year when a lot of things were going wrong. You know what I mean? It was not a great year for humanity, frankly, and it was a year that was just the most awkward to first cover. You know what I mean? It's very weird as someone who's covering a baseball team for all of a sudden being like, wow, 60 games, like that went by fast. Every game feeling a lot more electric. So we're going to talk about that. It's just going to be a fun little episode to recap all of that stuff. And I'm excited to do it because I think that this has been a team that, while it has been a whole lot of peaks and valleys, at least there's been a lot of movement, man. At least the journey, at least the road is full of things that are interesting. And there are not always a lot of teams that can say the same thing, right? There are bad teams that have just been nothing remarkable, right? Like you can't really say anything about them, you know, from your Rockies to even some teams that are like finally becoming good, like your Cincinnati Reds, stuff like that. It's been a quite the roller coaster, I think, for the Padres. So let's start, everybody. We got no time to waste because we're starting in 2020. And it's funny because I first got the Locked On gig, I believe at the end of 2019. If I'm not mistaken, I might have been doing like a couple of shows in 2019. I actually have no idea. I don't know why I'm forgetting this, but I know that I like officially like started doing podcasts in 2020 for sure. And then of course the pandemic happened. But the 2020 season is really when it was like, oh my God, like this actually might be awesome. This might be really, really fun for me to like take part in. I was expecting a good team because I had been following the Padres for a little bit, don't get me wrong, but I didn't know that it would be a team full of story, a team full of heart, a team full of joy and heartbreak, and genuinely becoming a team that you talk about, right? When you're a reporter, you sometimes kind of, and I'm not calling myself like, you know, Bernstein and Woodward or anything like that, but when you're kind of going into these things, you notice that guys are going to be more gravitated towards stories. They're not just like, oh wow, hometown kid, he was good, he had a couple things, and he worked really hard and made the majors. You know, I'm not saying those people aren't interesting. It is a classic tale, don't get me wrong, but it's not always interesting just to be good, right? Like it just isn't. I think that the Brewers are a good example. There are other teams out there, frankly, in football and basketball, all sorts of teams that are just good, but they're not like, they don't grab you the same way, right? And the Padres grabbed everybody basically immediately. And from 2020 onwards, and still to this day, are a team that is talked about in baseball media, despite the fact that they are, I mean, conclusively not a major fixture in Major League Baseball history. They're not a big market team either. So when you take all that into account, I'm heading into this season basically going, all right, this will be fun. I love Manny. I love this Tatis kid, right? Like, I'm like, oh yeah, Tatis kid, but also he was a rookie, right? And I've seen great prospects before. Heck, Will Myers, also a Padre, and he was a good example where I was like, hey, that guy won Rookie of the Year. You know what I mean? And then he turned out to be not an amazing player for the Padres. Not bad, and trust me, we will be talking about him soon. But I was used to it, so I didn't know if he was like that special, in like special. Not just like, oh, kid's a good player. That was kind of my impression, right? I was like, this is a really fun player to watch. We'll see how it pans out. I did not know that we'd be seeing the guy who would kind of ostensibly become like not just the face of the Padres, but one of the faces of the game and one of the faces of the modern game. A game full of much more energy, much more passion, kind of eliminating unwritten rules and whatnot. And 2020 is when I found that out. And I think that in 2020, it's also, by the way, coming off of 2019, the Padres, yes, Manny Machado, in my opinion, was the true, it's almost like, here's my nerdy analogy. You know how technically Blade was the first like Marvel movie that really blew up and was the first superhero movie post those old Christopher Reeve Supermans to be like, wow, that did well. Like these are financially lucrative opportunities. This can be awesome. But then the one that like is widely regarded as like the first true, whoa, like this became a huge thing in the culture and movie going experience was Spider-Man. That's kind of how I feel about it, right? Where Manny Machado was the Blade, because that guy getting signed alone, I still remember being in college. I remember the class I was in. I believe it was like a broadcasting class of sort, or it was either broadcasting or it was like comparative politics, one of those two. And I remember hearing the news. I was like, what? Really? Like, okay, yeah, they signed Eric Hosmer, but oh my God, they signed Manny Machado? That's not just a good free agent. That's like a 26-year-old. Like, this is a top-level free agent that a lot of people are like, this guy could be a Hall of Fame player. That's different, right? That's different when you make a signing like that. So I was like, oh, are the Padres for real? And hey, still the same conversations back then that are had now, right? They're like, oh, what are you going to do? They're not going to be competitive. Why would you go to the Padres? They're going to be irrelevant. How are they even going to be able to afford much more players? And it turned out that it was the beginning of this new era of Padres baseball that we love so much, even when it is pretty rough. So that's just like the prequel. And then Spider-Man, of course, was Tatis in 2020. Now, here's the thing. All the 2020 numbers are very weird, right? Fernando Tatis Jr. was like a 3-win player in 60 games, right? Like it was just absolutely insane. 3.3 to be exact, 151 WRC plus, 17 home runs. He was nearly the MVP that season. I believe it was Freddie Freeman that ends up winning it, which good for him and all that. It was also a great story too. Speaking of stories, with everything he was going through with his with the COVID, and all that stuff. So shouts to Freddie Freeman. That was an amazing moment. But when it came to the moments, there was a bunch. I think that one of the ones that I also have a special admiration for was the Labor Day winner. I don't know if everybody remembers this. Against the Colorado Rockies, the score was 0-0 until we got to the 10th inning. Dinelson Lamet, throwback to him, man. He was a guy that I actually remember doing this podcast, and I know people are going to sound like I'm praising myself. That's what this is going to sound like to some people who are listening as we enter the nostalgia road trip that we're going on right now. That everyone's going to be like, of course you did. But I remember heading that season being like, I think that Dinelson Lamet's pretty good. Like I was like, I don't know, man. Are we sure Chris Paddock's the best pitcher? And it turned out, no, Chris Paddock was not the best pitcher. And Chris Paddock was okay. He's certainly a pitcher that I think the team could use right now, given the back of their rotation, the uncertainty. But at that time, you headed into the season being like, all right, it's Chris Paddock, and that's it. We don't really know. And instead, it ended up being Dinelson Lamet as the ace, 2.09 ERA that year, finished Cy Young 4, and he had a gem of a game on Labor Day. And I'm hanging out with my friends outside his place. People, we had to social distance and all that stuff. And most importantly, we were like, get outside. We can't just be in enclosed space, I think was the thinking around that time. And we're outside watching on a projector on his like house wall. You know what I mean? Like we're projecting it on there. And it was great. And we're watching on Labor Day. We're having fun. We're kicking back, having a couple drinks and whatnot. It was great. And we weren't like partying hard or anything. But then on top of that, to get this Dinelson Lamet performance, which was 7 2/3 innings, 0 runs, 11 Ks, and 6 hits. And then for the walk-off, which would be a little bit fortuitous going forward, by none other than Jurickson Profar hitting the game winner. I don't know if everybody remembers that. That was just an astounding moment for the Padres that I'll never forget. And the Mateo slide to home plate with the bright, doe-eyed, like, Monkey D. Luffy type of smile. Like, he was just so happy. It was awesome. And I remember that. And I remember that a lot because it was like a moment that I also spent with friends, right? But it wouldn't be the last moment. We're going to keep talking about this because we're going to start from 2020, the way we did just now, and we're going all the way to 2024. So it should be a lot of fun. Although we'll spend a little bit less time on 24 because the ending of 24 wasn't a great, you know what I mean? So we're going to pull a winning time, if anybody watched that HBO show, where we're going to end it on if let's pretend we're Celtics fans for a second, end it there and don't talk about what happened next. You know what I mean? That was a deep cut analogy again, but whatever. Moving on, guys, I need to talk to you about a couple words from our sponsor, Stowe. Stay tuned. That's right, folks. It is our classic sponsor, our good friends over at FanDuel. When the game tips off, the NBA action is just getting started, and there's no better place to get in on it than FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. With FanDuel, you can place live bets throughout the game, so even if you miss the opening tip-off or want to bet on a fourth quarter comeback and you want to just bet on a certain amount of threes that are going to be made, whatever it is, you can stay in on the action. If you're looking for a bigger payout, you can even combine your live bets into a same-game parlay. I love it, guys. They have everything you could possibly need. And let me tell you, by the time you might hear me again, Luka Doncic versus the Mavericks is coming up. I know a lot of people are going to want to bet the over, and I understand that, and I would not be against that opinion. Let me tell you guys right now, though, FanDuel customers, on top of all of that I just mentioned, you can get $150 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. That's FanDuel.com for your shot at $150 in bonus bets. Make every moment more with FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. And just like that, everybody, we are back here at Locked On Padres. We took a long time getting through 2020, but we're going to zoom right along. And remember, go follow me on Twitter/X at Javapeno, JAVIIPENO, as well as Blue Sky. Send me all your questions and whatnot, because that's the next episode, because we're going to a weekend, it's going to be a mailbag. So I'd love to hear from you guys. But aside from the Jorge Mateo walk-off, again, Will Myers in general, I know there's no specific moment per se, aside from, we're going to get into one in a second, but the Will Myers season, I just need to emphasize with you guys, if you pull up his Baseball Savant page, it wasn't just a season that was inflated by BABIP, right? Like BABIP being batting average on balls in play, for those unfamiliar. That's not what it was. 155 WRC plus. This man slashed 288, 353, 600, guys, 600. And he was genuinely clutch. He had a walk-off against the Mariners that was outstanding, right? And then later on, we have perhaps his even better moment, and one that will be etched in history forever. And folks, you know what that was? That was, and I have a picture in my room that my friend actually got me that has the dirt or whatever. It's like, those like gimmicky memorabilia things of the Grand Slam record. That is easily, in my opinion, either the thing from 2020 to remember, because that's when the Padres, like I was talking about in the first episode, really started to become more than just a good team and more of a story, all right? You have Fernando Tatis Jr. hitting a grand slam on 3-0. That creates discourse for the next day. And then Will Myers, the moment I'm talking about, hitting the grand slam the next day, because for you to do that, it was almost like an FU to the Rangers for creating this giant discourse. So we're just going to hit one again on you. And this one you can't complain about, right? So that was amazing. And then the day after that, you get Manny Machado's walk-off for the third straight game with a grand slam. And in my opinion, at that time, and I wonder if you guys would disagree or not, I think it was the first true Manny moment. Machado wasn't bad, like outwardly bad for the team that first year, but he really fell off in the second half, and he was a little bit more fantasy special that year than he was in real life. It was a little bit of an empty stats thing. It's not totally his fault. It was his first year. He was adjusting to new pitching, all that stuff. But 2019 with the Padres, 109 WRC plus, 2.5 wins above replacement. The defense wasn't incredible. He still hit 32 home runs, but it just feel like they weren't always meaning something. That team just kind of fell out, right? But he hit one here, and that walk-off against the Rangers, in my opinion, was his first true amazing Padres moment. And then, don't get me wrong, we don't like him still, but Eric Hosmer hitting one on Friday. Another thing that I was present with my friends outside watching the projector for, that was electric. And here's the thing. It also meant a lot for me because I at this time really hated the Rangers, because the Rangers were known as these unwritten rules enforcers to me. I still hadn't forgotten the Jose Bautista bat flip, Rougned Odor, all of them going after him, and then the fight, and then Rougned Odor after them complaining about the bat flip. Rougned Odor in a national game, like international game, I forgot where he was playing, flipped his bat after a game winner. So it was just showcasing the hypocrisy and the cultural problems in baseball. So it was really cool that we did that against the Rangers of all teams. So that was amazing. Another thing that happens though, and also, by the way, I was mentioning Will Myers' clutch stats. In that year, 2020, with 2 outs and runners in scoring position, he hit 1319. Or I'm sorry, he had an OPS of 1319. Late in close games, 949. Within 1 run, 1,000 OPS. And then in terms of high leverage situations, 1358 in general. Like, OPS wise, the guy was absolutely insane that year, and it never replicated, but hey, it was fun while it lasted. What a fever dream that was. Then you had Mike Clevenger, the trade in the moment. I'm not excusing what happened later. I'm only want to signify this. It was just such an exciting moment to see them trade for a guy who at the time was abso-freaking-lutely an ace. He had one of the lowest ERAs in baseball of any pitcher of that time. Like, he was great. And it was just an exciting moment to be a part of. Like, oh my God, they got Clevenger. They're going for it. Of course, both him and Lamet get hurt in the playoffs. But we did get one more moment, folks, and that was, of course, the Cardinals game in which Tatis, game 2 specifically, they're down. You know, we're so used to it. Padres, like, okay, it's going to flame out as it always does with teams like this. But you have an amazing game. Not only does Tatis go crazy, hits 2 home runs in this game, he has the bat flip of all time. Ends up on MLB The Show. I mean, how fun was that? And then on top of that, Will Myers also has 2 big home runs in this game too. And it was the first time, I believe, that a duo of teammates both went yard twice in a playoff game since like Babe Ruth and Lou Gehrig. It was a crazy, crazy stat. I don't have it in front of me, but that was amazing. We don't have to talk about the Dodgers series after that. The only thing memorable from that Dodgers series to me was, one, that Lamet and Clevenger were hurt. So it was like, how are we this is ridiculous. Like, what are we supposed to do here? You know what I mean? So you were just really down to begin with, and that Dodgers team was a lot better anyway. And they ended up going on to win the World Series. What's it called? You also had the Cody Bellinger catch to rob Tatis. And then I think more importantly, and I've criticized Machado for this, that Bruce Dark-Gratterall was hyped about that catch, and then Machado was trying to get in his face. I found that deeply hypocritical on Machado's part. But that was it for 2020, right? And then, folks, you had 2021. And don't get me wrong, this isn't a great season. I think that heading into this year, it's really funny looking back on this season. Like, we kind of should have known. Like, the expectations were probably too high for this team heading into the year. And the reason I say that is because, yes, they did make big moves. I understand why, but there were certain areas where I'm like, we should have known something was wrong here. And that is in the case of Eric Hosmer and Will Myers. Will Myers was simply like, guys, I don't think he's going to be able to replicate a 600 slugging. And I know all the hard hit stuff was there, but I just don't know how much of that is sustainable. It was a little bit annoying because the baseball savant metrics were great on him, right? Like, he really was hitting the ball hard and the exit velocity was great and whatnot. But again, 60 game span. We should have known more from Eric Hosmer. And I feel like that's one of the storylines that I remember where it's like 2 guys that were huge for the reason that your offense was great. You should have known we're going to regress. You should have been prepared for that. And of course, Tatis being injured. That was another thing that ends up happening when he had that swing. So it was really a nightmare. And then you had the fall off. I understand though, because in the first half they were amazing and then they collapsed. But in general, losing, Tatis, the fact that Blake Snell was just bad that year, like just bad basically the entire time until like the last month and a half of the season. And then you had a little bit of Yu Darvish issues. He gets hurt in the second half, especially, does not maintain it. And in general, that team was the depth was not there. They did not have any extra plans and whatnot. It just didn't turn out right? And Ha-Seong Kim was also not good yet, right? He was just way too below average as a batter. Tommy Pham was really, really bad that year, right? Like, he was dreadful. Trent Grisham, well, the slash line doesn't look terrible, and he finished with a 740 OPS. People who remember the Padres that year, he was another one. I think it was him. I'd say it was him. Tommy Pham were the 2 players that I would mention the most for being the faces of the collapse offensively. And then on the other side of things, Jurickson Profar had a bad season. And then you just kind of didn't get anything out of the rotation with the exception of Joe Musgrove, who, of course, does throw a no-hitter, breaking history, folks. Wasn't that amazing? It was amazing. It was beautiful. It was so beautiful. The Musgrove no-hitter. I was actually, and there's one more moment from this year that I want to talk about. I was actually with Bryce Paddock of Locked On Rangers. We were talking, doing a live stream kind of during that, and it was his first time doing the live stream. And we were doing it for that game. So just, again, I've been around in weird situations for some really great Padres moments. So that was amazing. First no-hitter in Padres history. Shout out my guy Sully over at Locked On MLB, who every day would post, I predict today that blank will throw the first ever no-hitter for the Padres. And he would just do that every day. And it was one of those things where it was a long con bit because he just knew one day nobody's going to be attuned to this bit of mine. And then I'm going to get like crazy engagement. He had a bunch of people messaging him and all that stuff when he would do it every single day. And it was just a really funny, satisfying moment for him. So shout out to Sully for doing that. Shout out to Joe Musgrove, an absolute king. Still to this day, we miss you. We hope you get back very healthy. And then some other moments. Fernando Tatis Jr., we don't have to talk about this too much, but his home runs off Trevor Bauer, pretty fun. I've responded. One of you actually, I think, left a comment talking about Bauer before, and I respond just dismissing entirely the case. But that was really fun, especially because he did the eye thing. Famously, Trevor Bauer was testing out, throwing with only one eye during spring training. Hits the 2 bombs off of him. That was a really funny moment. And then for me, I talked about this recently, but the go-ahead homer against the Astros, 3-2 count with 2 outs, the one that Don Orsillo loses his mind. I watch it every now and then. He goes, "It's out to the tracks." That one of my favorite moments. I was in DC with my friends. This is 21. We're just starting to come out of the pandemic and all that stuff. We're starting to be around people. I hadn't seen my friends in so long, and I hadn't seen this particular friend in so long, even before the pandemic. So it was really cool to hang out with him, and we were there together at a game at Nationals Ballpark. The vibes were immaculate, folks. Like, the vibes could not be touched. And then we're also on our phone watching the Padres game, and we saw that, and we lost it. And then later we played the replay to hear Don Orsillo's thing, and that made us laugh. We were like, we even know. You couldn't hear as much because we were at the game and kind of staying tuned. It was just an amazing moment. That was 2021. And then came 2022 and 2023. 23 won't be talking about too much, but 2022, obviously, I think to this day, this isn't a traditional rankings episode where I do my top 10 favorite moments. I'm just kind of doing an oral history almost. But when it came to 2022, it clearly had, in my opinion, the best moments that the Padres have had over these last 5 years. I think pretty much for the most part, although 2024 is close. But before we get into those moments, guys, we got to take another break to hear from our sponsors, because we love our sponsors. They're very good and very lovely. So we'll be right back. Just a quick second, y'all. Got to take a second to talk about a very good snack that's both delicious and nutritious. Crack into a good source of protein with Wonderful Pistachios. Wonderful Pistachios is one of the highest protein nuts. Each 1 ounce serving has 6 grams of protein, giving you over 10% of your daily value. Plus, they're packed with fiber and better for you unsaturated fats to help keep you feeling fuller longer. So get snackin' and get crackin' with the snack that packs a protein punch. Visit wonderfulpistachios.com to learn more. Go check them out. I have them every day. They're very yummy. And just like that, everybody, we are back vibing and thriving on this wonderful Fun Friday nostalgia trip. Let's continue it, guys, because I'm having a lot of fun just going through this. The 2022 season, this is a season where, heading into it, the vibes are bad, right? Because 2021, epic collapse. Right? Epic collapse. Blake Snell, oh my God, the Rays won the trade. The Rays won another trade, right? This is what they were known for, especially at the time. And then what else? You don't have Fernando Tatis Jr. because he is recovering from a surgery that he received in the offseason. Remember when we still had this period, by the way? Again, the Padres have been like a soap opera in a lot of ways, in certain ways, but this was, coming off the time when Tatis was in that motorcycle accident, very infamously, hey, he's a kid, it's whatever. And he's clearly shown a lot of, not just remorse, but maturity over these past few years. But, he talked about which one when they asked him about the motorcycle accident. And I was like, okay, that's great. So that wasn't great. So heading into the year, you're like, oh my God, this team is like, you're begging for like Jake Cronenworth to be awesome. You're begging for Ha-Seong Kim to do something, CJ Abrams and all that. And guess what? It ends up working out, right? They end up having a really, really great season. Manny Machado having, in my opinion, a season where he should have won MVP. I am a believer in that. I know I'm biased, but he had a 6 or 7 win season. Ends up going to Paul Goldschmidt. In my opinion, his third base defense and the fact that they needed him more. The Padres did. Then Goldschmidt, he had more wins above replacement than Goldschmidt. So in my opinion, he was better. And by the way, I don't like it when we give MVPs when the other nominee is your teammate. Like, it's just, I know that like numerically that's like a little bit unfair, but like I would have said a little bit of the same thing this year with Aaron Judge. Like, your teammate's Juan Soto. You know what I mean? Like, part of me is like, how are you the most valuable when the other nominee is on your team? But that's just me. Whatever. That being said, Judge was like a 10 WAR player, while Goldschmidt was like 7, right? So I'm just saying it was historic, but I digress, ladies and gentlemen. That was a really fun season. Luke Voit had some big hits for this team. They were just one of those teams where they stuck together, the pitching improved, and I think most importantly, they just got hits at the right time, right? Jorge Alfaro being the absolute king of that. Absolutely the king of that, right? Like the 2022 season, the fact that Jorge Alfaro, he had the most walk-offs in Padres history with, I think, 4, or it might have been 5, most walk-off hits in Padres history. Jorge Alfaro. a player that was thrown aside, and he was really, really bad. He was one of the most athletic catchers I've ever seen, and he had a lot of power, but he had just no way to transfer it to the game. He didn't play really great defense, but he had 4 to 5 game-winning hits. I forgot if it was 4 or 5. Definitely 4. I don't know if there was another one. Just Padres record. Padres history again. It's like every year they make history some way or another. And they certainly made history when they traded for Soto. A moment that I will not forget, on a Zoom call, losing my mind, not paying attention at work. I was just like, oh. Like, they had been rumored. Don't get me wrong. It was possible. The Padres were rumored. But even still, you're like, oh no, the Dodgers are involved. The Cardinals are involved. You don't know. When that passive freaking notification came in, man, woo! That was like one of the best moments of my life. I could not believe that was happening. And I got approximately, I believe I went to the bathroom and got back to my phone. I had 96 messages was what I had at one point. Because there was a couple group chats that were blowing up and then some individuals. I saw the iMessage like blew all over. That was like, God, wasn't that just fun, guys? This is why everyone likes moves. They're just so exciting. Even if they sometimes don't amount to anything, which this one didn't. Right? It was very big for them in the playoffs, guys. Beating the Dodgers in 2022, in my opinion, overall, was paradise. I don't know why I'm always in weird situations. I'm never just watching on my couch when big Padres moments happen. I don't know why. Maybe it means I should always be active for big games, and then maybe things will go our way. Seeing the Jake Cronenworth home run, or the Jake Cronenworth, the 5-run inning that the Padres have, it was incredible. Soto has a big hit. Austin Nola has a dribbler that bounces off Freddie Freeman's glove. All that. 5-run inning. They take the lead and they end up holding on to it with the Josh Hader save. I am with my friends, or specifically I'm with my family, celebrating my sister's birthday in Maryland when I'm watching this game, right? And I'm up at night, snacking, stress eating, and he's in the hot tub, smoking a cigar, like having a good time. And I'm just munching on all these tons of snacks we had in this house. It was a great time with family. And I just was losing my mind, but I couldn't be too loud. So I went outside, did a couple type of moments. My video recap of that is pretty wild, by the way, if you ever see that. So that was amazing. I'll still remember it. Didn't end up going their way further, but again, we're being positive on today's episode. And it's always going to be fascinating to me. 20 years from now, it's going to be incredible looking at how much Soto got passed around, right? And none of it related to any, it's like you would assume, oh, was he like an off-field cancer or a clubhouse? No, it wasn't that. It's just extraordinary circumstances, right? We've never had a situation like this where Nationals, World Series champion, but then genuinely immediately bad. All of their big-time players, some of them leaving in the case of Anthony Rendon, and then the others being so injury-prone that they're a mess, like genuinely a horrifically bad team that they're like, we should probably reset. We don't want to just pay it all for one guy. We're never going to be good again. We need some prospects. And then on top of that, the Padres becoming a little bit shortchanged, especially with the passing of Peter Seidler, and then, all that sort of stuff kicking in. They trade him, and then the Yankees just getting outbid because the Mets had a new owner. If the Mets don't have Steve Cohen, I don't think that happens. I think he stays a Yankee, right? So crazy set of circumstances that I think some people are going to misrepresent, especially in today's engagement baity economy. So don't let them trick you into thinking that Soto was, he got passed around so much because he was actually overrated or something like that. I don't know. I would not put it past people. Then came 2023, one of the worst seasons of my life. I'm going to talk about this as little as possible because there's really not much to talk about. Only things that I can remember that were positive were Blake Snell, Cy Young. It was incredible watching him play. It sucks that they wasted him, though. It sucks. They actually had a good deadline. I liked what they did that deadline to at least give the team a chance without sacrificing too much. Don't buy fully into the season. It was according to FanGraphs, one of the least clutch teams the last 25 years. They had the worst clutch rating, I think the third worst clutch rating, and the other two teams that were worse still won 90 games and made the playoffs. Just to give you an idea, it was the Dodgers and I believe the Guardians. They still were, okay, they didn't win close games, but they were able to still win enough. The Padres were just so talented and just completely blew it. One of the most biggest choke job teams ever. Yes, the 2024 thing happened in game 5 and 4, but all in all, the entire season was a choke. It was unbelievable. Bogart's numbers, Grisham numbers, Machado numbers. I couldn't believe it watching that team that year. Cronenworth numbers, everything was bad with driving in runs. But Blake Snell did get the Cy Young, and he had one of the best streaks since Bob Gibson that season, right? With about 20 starts where he just had a super low ERA. No one had a better stretch since either Bob Gibson or years ago, more recently, Jake Arrieta with the Cubs. So that was amazing. Tatis, Platinum Glove. That was awesome too. Absolutely love that, especially for a guy who transferred to right field and was one of the reasons I was really optimistic on them heading into 2024 was like, hey, his bat wasn't fully back because he's recovering, getting back into the groove of things, but he's shown all of a sudden he's an amazing defensive player. Don't know what happened necessarily this past year, but I think he's still got it in him to be a really quality defensive player for a position that everybody thought, and I remember those reactions, and they were justified, that they were like, moving him to right field, the Padres are screwed, they don't know what they're doing. Turned out to be the right decision. Shout out to Tatis. And after that season, if there was one thing that Melvin that I'll remember is that he was like, the guy's been amazing. He asked him, whatever I asked him to do, he does. Clearly trying to make amends for all the chicanery and the tomfoolery that he'd been caught doing before. So shouts to Tatis. And then the only other thing I remember was, you guys remember that San Francisco series in Mexico? You remember that one? It was really weird. It was the one where, like, I guess they were playing in like a T-ball park, and one of the games, the final score was like 14, like whatever it was. There was just 1,000 runs being scored. And honestly, we should have that more. We should, baseball, that would be great. How fun would it be every year if baseball fans just get to know that we play in this one ballpark where you're just going to get 1,000 runs scored? You know what I mean? That would be so much fun. Great game. Unfortunately, did not portend a future offensive success. But then came 2024, a season that I was very high on, because my thing was, the roster was still good. My thing was Jackson Merrill. There's no way this guy's at least as, like, there's no way he's worse than Trent Grisham. My thought was, yes, he might struggle defensively, but there's no way he's going to be worse than Grisham offensively. I actually think a lot of advanced stats and analytics were way too high on him being a above 200 hitter. I was like, guys, you're not watching him play. He doesn't know how to hit. And not only that, but Jackson Merrill was rookie of the year, second rookie of the year. And for some people, should have been first. Mostly Padres fans. Me, I think it's dumb. It's dumb getting mad about that. Like, Paul Skeens was breaking records that year. You know what I mean? Like, we hadn't seen something that since like the 1930s. So I'm totally fine with him winning. But again, Padres fans getting robbed of awards. Didn't even bring up Jay Cronenworth. Maybe he could have run Rookie of the Year in 2020. All of a sudden, relievers get it. You know what I mean? Like, all of a sudden, we're giving it to his pitcher instead of the batter. So Padres getting robbed there. And 2024, just to list them off pretty quickly, because I've done this before, go check out my episode when I talked about the top 10 best moments of the 2024 Padres season. A season that I think, while it did not end well, has to be appreciated. So go check out that episode, but just some highlights. The Urias walk-off in his first game, the triple play to clinch the playoffs, Cease's no-hitter, the entirety, frankly, of Ha-Seong Kim and Manny Machado's relationship, Michael King's first playoff start, and for me, one of the ones that I'll always remember because I am a dramatic boy and I love some spice, you know what I mean? Jurickson Profar versus the Washington Nationals. The entire stretch of him, you know, them walking Luis Urias, who had not been playing well, and they pitched to Jurickson Profar, who was one of the best players in baseball and ended up being the best. But even at that time was one of the best players in baseball in high leverage situations. Gets the hit, splits the gap, walk-off home run, and he's talking his stuff to the fans, and then maybe a little bit towards the Diamondbacks or the Nationals dugout. What happens? They start throwing a fit. They go over and they hit him. First pitch of the game, all that stuff. And actually, before that, Keibert Ruiz, famously, the sleeper agent, Mike Rizzo, for the Washington Nationals, giving up basically getting nothing in return for Max Scherzer and Trey Turner. Keibert Ruiz, literally one of the worst qualified catchers in baseball, just pushing and touching him. And Profar's like, what are you doing? And it's funny that Manny was actually the one from that incident that kind of instigated it more, and he's the one that got in the way. Hits Profar, then Manny hits an absolute moonshot and walks around the bases. I'm going to watch that right after I finish recording this episode. That was so awesome. And then you had the situation in which Jurickson Profar then came up and hit a grand slam later in the game. Just one of my favorite moments of 2024. I'll always remember it. But in general, guys, that's kind of it. The last 5 years, man, 5 seasons of covering this team. Like, I don't know what to like. I just think it's been a ride, man. And while I think that I've shared my opinions on this team that I think they could still be very, very good. But I think my worry is just that the division's really good. The Giants are starting to finally show a semblance of a plan. The D-backs, I think, are going to be amazing this year. I think that team's going to win like 94 games. I am so bullish on the D-backs, and I don't think people are paying enough attention to them. I don't think they're getting enough coverage. So I still think this team could be good. But I do think that the hype factor isn't there. And one thing we know about this team is they have not been very consistent. They're good one year, bad the next. Good one year, bad the next. Historically good one year, bad the next. So I don't know exactly what's going to happen. But for right now, it has been such a privilege covering this team over the last 5 years. You can't tell me, if you just listen to this one episode, that this hasn't been an exciting team. They broke a Grand Slam record. They had their first no-hitter. They had a second no-hitter. Dylan Cease, the guy who took it from him when he was a White Sox, was now on the Padres. You had the Will Myers weird season. You had the Grand Slam record. You had beating the Dodgers in the playoffs. You had the trade for Juan Soto. You had the signing of Manny Machado to start it all in a real firm way. It's amazing times, man. Amazing times. So whenever you get a little bit frustrated, just remember this team, this era, this configuration of the San Diego Padres is not what they used to be, right? This team was Jacksonville Jaguars type of famous. And frankly, even the Jaguars are probably more famous than the Padres, but you get my point. It's football. In context of football, they're like, no one really talks about them. Like, just not a well-known team. So just keep that in mind as we head into this season, that at least be grateful for those memories. Because even if you joined a little bit late, maybe even if you weren't even 2019 or the beginning of AJ Preller's tenure, you've still got a bunch of things to talk about. It is not a boring team. You can never say that about the Padres. Never can say that they're boring. And in a lot of ways, it's pretty beautiful, isn't it? Never boring. Gotta love it. And with that all being said, everybody, that about does it for today's edition of the Locked On Padres podcast, the only pod that may be better than the Padres themselves. Remember to subscribe to the podcast wherever you get your podcasts from. Follow me on Twitter/X and Blue Sky at Javipeno, JAVIIPENO, especially as we get closer to the season and I'll start live tweeting games and all that a lot more. And send me your questions to be answered on Monday's Mailbag Pod. We do that every single Monday. Tuesday, we're also going to be doing the classic episode of what are the things that I'm keeping an eye on in spring training. Really nerdy, small things, right? You're not going to get like, oh, wow, is Tatis going to be good this year? Like, you're not going to get that from spring training, but little positional things, little pitch change things, little velocity things, little prospect things, all that sort of stuff. We will be talking about that for spring training on Tuesday. And frankly, I haven't planned farther after that, but I promise you it's going to be good. So until that next time, everybody, stay safe. And of course, stay faithful. My Fire Faithful homies, take care.